How's it going, everyone? And welcome to the latest episode of the Why the Mountains podcast with me, your host, Stephen Farley. If you are a hill walker or a mountaineer, or just someone with a love of stories of adventure in the mountains, this is the podcast for you. In this first series, we are exploring the history of Irish mountaineers on Everest, from the earliest pioneering days right up to the latest commercial expeditions. If you haven't listened to our earlier podcasts, I suggest you do that first, before continuing with this latest episode. This is the second episode with Dawson Stelfox, the leader of the 1993 Irish Everest expedition. In this episode, the preparation is over, and we hear from Dawson about life on the mountain and moving up towards the summit. I started by asking Dawson, why the North Ridge?
Okay, there are multiple reasons for that. Firstly, because we were the first Irish expedition to try and climb Everest, there was no, if you like, no history there, except right the way back in 1921, the very first leader of the first Everest reconnaissance expedition was Charles Howard Bury, who was from Mullingar and lived in Mullingar after the expedition. He was in the British Army, he was a British diplomat, but he very much saw himself as an Irishman. And that was a previous Irish connection to the north side. Secondly, although no way up the mountain to be climbed from Ireland, the North Ridge, scene of all the very early British expeditions to Everest, right up until the Second World War, none of them have been successful. So there hadn't been a British success on the North Ridge, assuming that Mallory and Irvine didn't get there before they died in 1924. And because we were an all-Ireland expedition, some of us, including myself, had both British and Irish passports. So if we were successful, we could claim both the first British ascent to the North Ridge, as well as the first Irish ascent to the mountain. So that was a double goal, if you like. There'd been the previous knowledge of that side. Frank and Dermot had been on the 1987 Shanxi expedition, which had gone in to the North Col to try and climb another mountain. So they had a little bit of knowledge of that side. But then I suppose the other reason, a couple of reasons really, was even by 1993, the south side of Everest was starting to become what we would call as commercialised or commercially run expeditions going in, and we wanted to try and stay clear of that and be independent from all that. And the final reason was a safety reason in lots of ways. The Khumbu Icefall on the south side is still today by far the most dangerous part of climbing, and it's subjective danger, so you can't really do much about it. And most expeditions these days rely on very large numbers of Sherpas going in to fix up ropes through the icefall. And we were a bit uncomfortable about that from the point of view of you're asking the Sherpas to take on big risks for yourselves. And we wanted to try and do the expedition with minimal Sherpa involvement, and certainly high in the mountain. So multiple reasons really which came together, and we decided to go for the north side.
There are many routes up Mount Everest, but the two main and most popular routes are the Southeast Ridge, which sees the majority of expeditions, and the North Ridge. Dawson and his teammates had chosen the North Ridge route, so I asked him to describe how it works on that side of the mountain.
Okay, so base camp is at the end of the Runbook Glacier, and base camp on the north side is situated basically as far as you can drive to. So big heavy trucks, four-wheel drive trucks, can drive up the Runbook Valley, past the Runbook Monastery, still the highest monastery in the world, about 16,000 feet, up to base camp, about 17,000 feet. And that is very different from the south side, obviously, where you have to walk for a couple of weeks to get into the base camp. So if you drive to base camp, but just quite a long way away from the mountain at that stage. So the base camp is the comfortable bit, I suppose you can call it, is where you come down to for rests. But the actual sort of kicking off point for the serious climbing is right on up the Runbook Glacier, and we call it an advanced base camp, Camp Colgate. In the old British terminology for the pre-war expeditions, that was Camp 3, and that they had two intermediate camps. So the first task is really to get up to that point, and really the climbing as such only starts at that point, which is about 6,000 meters. And the first time you go up there, again, the altitude just drains you. I mean, most of us took 2 days to go up there. You camped on the way up. And by the end of the expedition, you'd be going up and down that in a few hours. So that's the effect the acclimatization has on you. But Camp Colgate, the advanced base camp, is really the starting point for climbing as such. Technical climbing. You then have a fairly steep climb up to the North Col, about 7,000 meters, and we had a camp on the North Col. And 7,000 meters is about the sort of height where, sort of psychologically, it's sort of height at the time. Certainly, 7,000 meters was, about the maximum, or probably beyond the point where you could get rescued from by helicopters or something in terms of that. So, 7,000 meters is a psychologically important height, and then that's a point for the climb up the North Ridge. And we were to place 2 further camps on the North Ridge. One that we put in place, and then the last one, which was we just carried up our tents, and it was more like an alpine style. Frank and I carried up the gear, camped there the night, carried on the next day up to the top. Ideally, we'd have set that camp up in advance as well, but bad weather intervened, and there was a long period of time where it was too windy to go up into the upper part of the mountain. So we eventually set our camp up as we climbed.
The route is one thing, and for the most part it will be consistent, but the weather can be the key determining factor for any expedition. I asked Dawson about the conditions they faced in 1993.
Any big mountain on Everest in particular attracts all the weather that's going. Really, the reason most people go to the Himalayas in the spring, but effectively you have 2 seasons really for trying to climb. And the reason those seasons are important is that basically before the monsoon and after the monsoon, during the monsoon you get big heavy snowfalls, so it makes it very tough going. Very rarely does Everest get climbed in the monsoon. One of the most famous ascents by Reinhold Messner. So in 1980, he did climb through the monsoon. But most people climb now the spring and the autumn. And the reason for that is that both before and after the monsoon, the very, very high winds, the jet stream winds, which are continuously circling around at about the height of Everest and 8,000 meters, they get pushed up a bit higher by the monsoon coming in or going away, and the wind drops down, generally speaking, at the high altitudes. And really that's the key to being able to be up there. Because if you're up there and the jet stream winds are around, you can't possibly survive time at all, because it goes from ambient air temperature of maybe -20, -30 to multiple times that with wind chill factor. So wind is the crucial factor for being able to survive really up there. So what a spring expedition is trying to do is get everything in place, slow down, get the camps in place, and then wait for the period when the jet stream winds go higher than the summit, and then go in, which is why nearly all the ascents are middle to the end of May, really, because once you get into June, the monsoon comes in early in May, generally speaking, it's too windy. But what it does mean is that you're setting up your camps during periods of unsettled weather, and inevitably you hit periods when it's too windy in particular, or too snowy to be able to climb. So you get stuck for periods, and the best way to deal with those is not to try and hang on high altitude and brave it out, but to actually come back down off the mountain again, get recovered, get reacclimatized. Because the risk is if you sit around up at high altitude waiting for good weather, then by the time the good weather comes, you're drained so much from living at high altitude for so long. So psychologically, you have to think about moving up and down the mountain in tune with the weather patterns wherever possible, to try and make sure that you're in the right place and you're feeling healthy and you're acclimatized whenever those winds drop and you have a chance then to go very high. So it's a game, as always, with the weather. I'm trying to predict that. And back in 93, we had quite good weather forecasts. We had an agreement with the British Met Office in Bracknell in England, and to get to send us out mountain-specific weather forecast by satellite phone. That's improved hugely these days now. It's very, very accurate forecasting. So expeditions these days can usually plan to the day or so as to when to go and for those breaks in the weather. But still the same problem today. You're trying to climb in breaks in the weather. Really.
Another factor that can have an impact on the success or failure of an expedition is other teams. I'm sure most of you have seen photos from recent years of crowds at certain points on the Southeast Ridge route and on the summit. I asked Dawson what it was like for them in 1993.
When we arrived, there was actually a Chinese expedition there who'd been on the mountain very early on. They climbed up and they were actually on the higher slopes of the mountain when we arrived. And they did get a period of good weather and they got, I think, 2 people to the top in early May. But they both got very severe frostbite on the way down, and some of their other team had to rescue them. And in fact, we donated some of our oxygen and other equipment to the Chinese to help them in their rescue. So they got their 2 summit people down, but they were quite badly injured. They left, and then we had a period when there was nobody else there. And then later on in May, there was an international group came, which actually was one of the very early attempts at a sort of commercially run group, but they were very badly organised and very badly sort of equipped, and they more or less fell apart and didn't get much higher than the North Col at all. So they were sort of there for a bit, but didn't make any impression on the mountain at all. And then they went back. So by the time that we were heading towards the summit, we were the only team on the mountain, which was, quite a remarkable experience. And because I was quite late on in May, and there being a lot of bad weather, we found out as well through radio broadcasts that all the teams on the south side, and some of them had been successful early on, had all gone home as well. So by the time we went to the top, we were not only the only team on the north side, but we were the only team on the mountain as well. So getting to the top, when I eventually got to the top, there wasn't even any tracks in the snow coming up from the south side either. So quite special, really, especially if you compare it to what happens generally today in terms of the numbers. But yes, on our summit attempts, we were the only team on the mountain.
Famously, it's Dawson and Frank Nugent who are in place to make the summit attempt for the team. I asked Dawson as leader if this is something that was planned from the start.
Okay, well, we didn't make that decision until quite late on the expedition. At the start, we were 8 climbers. Any one of them was competent to go to the top. And it was only very late on after we got the second camp in place and came down to base camp and talked through the strategy for the summit attempts that we all agreed on the strategy. And that was that Frank and I probably acknowledged at that time that we were the best in terms of acclimatization, in terms of physical capacity. So we went, we got the first go at it, supported by Mike Barry, who came with us up to the second camp above the North Col to help us on the mountain. And then Tony and Robbie, supported by Mick Murphy, would then follow a couple of days behind us and make the second attempt. Dermot and Richard had made a huge effort just before that period of bad weather to lift quite a lot of equipment up to 8,000 metres, and had gone up there with oxygen to save the oxygen supplies. Made a huge effort, got a bit of frostbite, got exhausted during that, and so they ruled themselves out of a summit attempt at that stage. But they made a huge effort to help us and get that equipment up, heavy equipment up, high up the mountain. So that was the strategy we put together. But we'd failed to put the top camp into place so in advance, which would have been ideal. So Frank and I had to carry that equipment up with us up to the top camp. And that meant in some ways that Robbie and Tony might have had a clearer run to the top. It didn't work out that way in the end. But we went first.
As leader of the expedition, I asked Dawson if that made things harder for him, if he felt any extra pressure as a result, especially high up on the mountain when decisions were being made.
Not hugely, I don't think. We were all very motivated to make it successful. I don't think that pressure to be successful would have ever overcome my judgment in terms of when to go, when to turn back, things like that. Um, we all wanted to get there, but none of us were going to die getting there. Really, we were very clear about that. And in some ways, having the backup of Tony and Robbie coming behind, if you like, took a wee bit of that pressure off, because we're saying our job, Frank and our job, is to get the camp in, and then when you go for the top, we'll see how far we get. And Frank, of course, did make the judgment to turn back when it was, the crucial judgment, and that's a key skill of mountaineering, is knowing when to turn back off things, when to retreat, and when you can push on. You need a very high degree of self-awareness, what your capacity is at any particular time. So, although there was some pressure on, I don't think that was an overwhelming pressure by any means. And the priority really was to get the very top camp established. So that was over. So we were there off North Col camp, Camp 2, which was on the ridge at about 7,900 metres or so. And then we wanted to get another camp as high as we could before going onto the ridge itself, to about 1,300 metres. And we'd ideally have liked to get that in advance, come back down, have a rest, and then go up and use that camp. But we ran out of time for that. So we had to place that camp as we went up the mountain. So the pressure was on really to get that camp in, and then to see how far we can get.
So the 26th of May came around, and things were starting to fall into place. I asked Dawson how things started to shape up and how they were feeling about it.
We were elated, really, because it felt like we got the right decision made. We thought we were going to get a period of nice still weather. Wind, as I say, is the crucial thing. The wind had dropped, and the weather was generally clear. So it's cold, but it's cold and clear you can cope with the equipment you have. So that really set us up, and that got the enthusiasm going. But we had a very long day on the 26th, because we had to get up to place the camp. And then, as well as the stuff we were carrying, we had to pick up the stuff, the intermittent, and Cocoon, the Sherpas, and Richard, and put it in place and bring that up to the top camp as well. So we'd sort of a long day ahead. And we got into that top camp, got the tent set up, and started getting, snow melted for drinks and food and stuff. That was a long day. I mean, ideally, you'd have a short day before your summit day and get ready for it. It was a long day, but we were buoyed up, I think, we were feeling quite well, and the weather was good. And the weather is always crucial in these things, the weather was good. So that, a long day, but we felt good about it. We felt we more there, basically. We weren't exhausted. When you're at altitude, you're very conscious you're in this sort of ticking clock. Really, you can't stay up at high altitude for very long. We had a very limited amount of oxygen because we were carrying the oxygen ourselves. We had very limited amount, and we had to save that for the effort of the summit day. So we were on very, very limited use of oxygen in certain parts, and that means that your body really is deteriorating when you're up there, and you know that you either have to go up or go down. You can't hang about, really. You have to sort of make your effort, or else just decide that, if you're getting out of there, really. If you hang around, you just deteriorate, it gets worse.
The fateful day arrives, May 27th. So much work had gone into getting to this point. I asked Dawson to describe the morning, the gear, the route, the weather, the condition of the climbing parties, and how it all unfolded.
Okay, well, it was an odd night in the way. It was very still, but there was a lightning storm flickering out behind Everest, and dark clouds below us and around us. So it wasn't entirely, clear, it wasn't entirely certain. But the wind, said, was the crucial thing. So it was flat calm at that point. We set off. We actually went up at 2. It takes that length of time just to get up, get something to drink, get your clothes on, get your food into your boots on. Particular, get geared up. It took us hours to do that because you move so slowly. Your brain's working so slowly. was still dark at 5 o'clock in the morning, so we set off in the dark. I had torch, following one line we picked out the night before, to get up onto the ridge. And because the weather had been so bad in the weeks before going up there was a lot of snow, a lot of deep snow. So we took turns of trying to break trail up onto the ridge itself, and we hoped that once we got onto the ridge, there'd be less snow, and that's the way it turned out to be. But yeah, so broadly speaking, you've got everything, pretty much everything you need is inside your down suit because you have to keep it warm. So food, water bottle, batteries, torch, everything, camera, everything is sort of tucked inside your suit. Really, you can't afford to carry very much. I mean, if you want to be cautious up here, you'd be carrying a sleeping bag or a tent or something like that. But if you start carrying all that stuff, you'll be so slow that inevitably you'll probably end up having to camp. So you take a risk in terms of being able to move at a certain speed. We were using oxygen. We had lots of debates beforehand about whether or not we could climb Everest without oxygen. At that stage, and even since, very, very few people have. And even now, 30 years later, nobody from Ireland has climbed Everest without oxygen. But we were determined to do it with, without Sherpa support on the summit of tents, and with a limited amount. So we had 2 bottles, trying to add 2 bottles each of oxygen, which meant it was a pretty low rate of supply because we needed to last. We knew it was going to be a very long day. So we were guarding our oxygen from the start. I mean, as dawn broke, we were up on the north ridge, the crest of the ridge, and that was the most magnificent thing, really, because you could see the summit, you could see the ridge, quite daunting as it was. But again, the weather was staying good. But curiously enough, everything filled in below us, so clouds were coming up out of the valley, and in fact, even down to North Call, 7,000 metres, it was snowing down there. So we were, it was curious whether we were above the clouds. Back down at base camp, it looked as if the mountain was completely enclosed in fog and cloud. And I said Camp 1, where some of the others were, it was actually snowing. And it was only when we got on the radio and started to be able to say, it's actually up in the sun shining, there's no wind, quite a nice day, that we realised the difference. And then people down below us realised that effectively some of the time was on, really, because the weather up high on the mountain was good. We kept going, and very slowly, as you do up at altitude. But Frank was starting to have problems with his breathing. He was starting to get difficulties with his breathing mask. It was ice forming and it was clogging up. And eventually, as you have to dip off the crest of the ridge a few times and make your way back onto it. And we got back onto the crest of the ridge just below the second step, the most difficult part of the route. And Frank realised at that stage that he was struggling with altitude, struggling with breathing, and starting to lose power, really starting to lose capacity, and decided at that point that he would stop, really. And that, I mean, I've said many times, that's the most difficult decision a mountaineer needs to make. And there's many instances where climbers push on and exhaust themselves and maybe get to the summit, but then are just so completely exhausted that they can't look after themselves, can't get back down. And of course, rescue up there is impossible, really. So Frank, at that stage, made the very courageous decision, very responsible decision that he was going to go back down and to a certain extent maximise my chances of getting up, because he wouldn't be holding me back, or I wouldn't have to be gone on a bit further and then needed help. I would have had to obviously help him. So we stopped while he was still had the capacity to look after himself and get back down to the camp himself. So that was a big decision. At that stage, I was by no means confident that I was going to get to the top, but conscious that Tony and Robbie were coming behind, I wanted to at least get as far as the second step. Second step is it's the crux, the most difficult part of the route. It's where most of all the early British expeditions failed, really, and that it's a crag about 200 feet high, but the vertical bit of it is about maybe 30 feet high or so. But the actual, from bottom to top, it's probably about 200 feet. It's quite a long way up. Most of it is you wind your way up, and then there's a steep, nearly vertical section on that. And that is sort of the notorious bit of the North Ridge. So I wanted at least to get as far as that to see it, to be able to tell to him, because we didn't know what it was like really in advance. We'd never spoken to anybody that climbed it, and we didn't have good photographs of it. It was an unknown to us at that time. So what we were very keen, I was very keen to get at least that far, and then to be able to tell Tony and Robbie what it was like. And so I pushed on, and Frank took a really good photograph of me from his high point, heading towards the second step. It's probably the best photograph we have from the expedition. No, even from the second step, there's another third step beyond that, and then there's the summit period. And it's the nature of summits is they always look a bit closer than they are, and then you get to them and another bit. But the second step is the big physical barrier, but also a psychological barrier as well. Yes, the second step is, it's the most notorious bit, and it was the bit that turned all the pre-war expeditions. The Chinese claimed to climb the North Ridge in 1969, I think it's 57 or 69, and nobody in the West actually believed them. But they went back in 1975, and the Chinese definitely did climb it in 1975, but they took with them at that stage a ladder. Sort of like a loft ladder is the best way to describe it. It's only about 20 feet long, but they pushed it up this vertical step and fixed it to the rock, and then climbed the ladder and got on to the top. And that ladder was still there in 1993 when we were there. It's since been replaced by a more substantial and longer ladder. Now, but 1993, the original Chinese ladder was there, and not very security fixed. It sort of hung there and it swayed about a bit, and went as you stood on it, it sort of sagged down and swung round a bit. But I sort of got to the ladder, clipped in. There was an old bit of fixed rope down the side of it as well. Clipped into that, climbed the ladder, and got to the top of the second step. And then so pretty clearly remember that today. I mean, that was the great psychological sort of boost I needed to push on a bit further. Because before that, I'd been talking on the radio drinking Dermot, and I'd been saying things like, well, it's getting late on today, and, the crowd's coming up, and not too sure, I'll go a bit further and see how it is. And then I got to the top of the second step, got up the ladder, got onto the second step, and it was, totally down there and saying, oh, well, the sun's coming out, and it's not so bad, and plenty of time left, So that, as always, the mind controls what you're doing in the mountains, and that boost of getting up the second step just sort of gave me the confidence to push on, even though it was still quite a few hours from there up to the top. That confidence to push on, and because once you tell yourself you've climbed the hardest bit, and therefore there's no reason why you can't keep going.
It is hard to imagine truly what is going on in the mind of a climber, all alone on the North Ridge of Everest, with the second step, the crux of the route, behind them. There is a danger of thinking it's in the bag after this obstacle is achieved. I put this to Dawson.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I think that's one of the things that comes with this sort of long experience of climbing, is that you know that you have to be, and especially when you're up in a big mountain on your own, you are completely reliant on yourself. Nobody's going to come and rescue you. You can't just sit down and call for help. And you plot your day, not just for the way up, but for the way down as well. And quite often, coming down is harder than going up. And for all sorts of reasons, climbing down things is harder, but you're tireder. You've lost that sort of psychological boost of, the adrenaline flow of going to the top. And most accidents to people happen on the way down, So you build that, I built that into all the thinking in terms of, you're measuring your reserves, not just what it's going to take to get up, but to get back down again. So, at any stage, I mean, I was, always thinking, if something happens, here, which is going to slow me down more or whatever, I will turn back, I won't push on regardless. Though I did push the time, it'd been, quite often people talk about a turnaround time where, you're going to be able to get down in daylight or whatever. And I didn't obviously get down in daylight, I got down in the dark. So I did push the turnaround time, I didn't actually have a fixed turnaround time. It was just continually like measuring how I felt against what there was still to do. But I decided to push that out and recognizing that it would be in the dark at the end of the day.
So at 5:07 p.m. local time, on Thursday, 27th of May 1993, roughly 12 hours after starting out from High Camp with his partner Frank Nugent, Dawson Stelfox sets foot on the summit of Everest. The first Irishman to do so, and the first Briton to successfully summit the mountain via the North Ridge route. When I asked him about what he said on the summit, he claimed to me he was rambling a bit. I disagreed and read his words back to him. Everest, calling wrong book. Come in please, over. Dermot, the altimeter is reading 8,848 metres, and I'm sitting on the summit of the world. Lorna Siggins, in her book, describes the scene she witnessed as reporter on the spot. Summers sat motionless on the stool by the radio. For a second there was silence. Then whoops, shouts, hugs, many, many tears. Asha Ray rushed out of the tent. It was just half a dozen yak men, but it seemed as if the whole of the valley had broken into a cheer.
Yeah, and I think I went on. I was very keen to recognise that even though I was there on my own, that I represented the whole of the expedition, and in fact, all the people that supported us and all our friends and family back home, and everybody that contributed to the expedition, because I mean, I wouldn't have got there on my own. I mean, I was on my own, but I wouldn't have got there on my own. And that was the spirit of the expedition. Or that any of us would have been trying to get, at least one, ideally two or more people onto the top. But so I tried to say that from the top, but your brain's not working terribly well up there, and you're very conscious that again, it's 5 o'clock in the evening and it got dark at 9 o'clock in the evening, and it taken me 12 hours to get up, so it was going to take me a long time to get back down again. Well, it was amazing because, as you get to the top of the mountain, you see the other side, basically, so even though it was cloudy down below, I could see down the south side. There was no tracks on the south side. I could see over the Lopsy, the Third S Mountain, just across the way, the ridge of that, across to Nipsey. You get obviously a 360-degree view right around you. And as even though the valleys were filled with cloud, it was still a spectacular view, really, because all the big mountains were poking up through that cloud and round. And just a realisation that all that effort, all that work, all the teamwork that had gone into it had allowed me to get up there. It was an amazing feeling. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I can still picture it 30 years later and that. But inevitably, very quickly, it becomes clear that you need to get out of there. You need to get down. I think I spent about 20 minutes on the top, really. And I was lucky with the weather. There was no wind. I mean, wind, keep saying about the wind, but the wind is the crucial factor. And it's probably about minus 30 or so. But when you're wearing good gear, good one-piece down suit, I had good many layers on underneath that. I was feeling fairly well. You can cope with that sort of temperature and still air. And the wind is the factor that allows you to be there. So it was comfortable. I was able to take off the outer gloves and take pictures and talk in the radio. And so it wasn't a hardship being there. It was a delight to be up there, really.
One thing that usually characterises someone reaching the summit of Everest is what they bring with them, often flags of their country. Dawson had no such flag with him, but a small pennant with the names of the expedition sponsors. I asked him about this.
Yeah, I know it was a team decision. None of us were, none of us wanted to be portrayed as nationalist in that way. We were doing this as climbers for the climbing community from Ireland, and people, all of us had sort of grown up climbing in Ireland and been part of the climbing community, north and south. So we were proud to represent both countries, if you like, but the people of Ireland really more than any flag.
The decision to use a pennant was in keeping with the spirit of the expedition from the start, an Irish expedition of Irish mountaineers from both the north and the south, representing the Irish climbing community. Controversy would surround this decision, though not created by the mountaineers, who were delighted with the success of the expedition. And all thoughts turned to the descent and getting all the Irish climbers off the hill.
First part of it went straightforwardly and got back down to close to the top of the second step, and then the cloud had risen below me, and it had actually been snowing below me at the time, so my tracks across the snow slope leading to the top of the second step had been filled in, and the cloud was sort of swirling around at the time. So at that stage I got a bit lost, and really I dropped off the route and dropped down too quickly. And it was at that point that I had this sort of experience, which is very, very hard to describe, and I've tried to describe it a few times, but it's not uncommon amongst mountaineers when they're sort of, in extreme circumstances. But anyway, I sort of had this flash of myself on the slope. So I had sort of bird's eye view where I was looking down at myself on the slope, and I could see where I was on the slope, and I could see where I was meant to be, and I knew I was in the wrong place. Really, I dropped down a couple of 100 feet too low, and if I carried on down where I went, I would have gone over a big cliff just down below me. And so I sort of, to this stage on the way down, I then had to climb back up again a couple of 100 feet to find the top of the second step. And then find the top of the second step, I was able to abseil down that. It was kind of a light rope with me, very, very light 7-millimeter rope, really for just abseiling awkward bits. So abseiled down the second step, brought the rope down, carried on down, ran out of oxygen at that stage, so I was moving even slower. And then a couple of other times made short abseils down where tricky rock steps, just to keep myself safe, really. So it was very slow, but very measured. And then after 3 or 4 hours, it got dark. So the last couple of hours back down to the camp, it was dark. So head torch bang on again, luckily. I kept it inside my jacket, so the battery was working. The head torch on for the last bit down. And because the snow had been so deep on the way up, Frank and I created a big trench through that snow. So I was actually able to find that trench, and that trench led me right back down to the camp. Couple of Tony and Robbie in particular, who stood outside the tents shining his light back up at me because they'd come up that day to the tents, and he sort of guided me in back into the camp, and got back there at about, I can't remember now, but it took me 6 hours to get down, so I guess 11 o'clock or so at night down there. Long day,
18 hours is a long day, and that was Dawson's day done. But for others, Tony Burke and Robbie Fenlon, would there be a chance at a second summit success?
So they'd come up that day. They were feeling quite good. Yeah, they got a good night's sleep, and then they headed off early in the morning. Frank and I stayed in bed. Frank was good. Frank had got back down safely to the camp. He was fine. He had spent the day cooking up melting water, melting snow for drinks, and fed me that evening when I got back down. Tony and Robbie set out, and we're going strong. They got up onto the ridge and carried along, and then the weather started to deteriorate again. The wind started to come up, and cloud came in, started to snow on them, and they took the decision to turn back, and somewhere around about the first step before the second step, on the ridge. And again, without, as you'd say, absolutely the right decision, because as they came back down into the camp, Frank and I waited until they came back down, and then we all descended together, right back down to the North Col. And as we did that, the weather got worse and worse and worse. And so by the time we were going back down to the North Col, by the time we got to the North Col, it was pretty much full-on blizzard and snow whirling around. And so they made the right decision. Really, the weather broke, the weather window was very short. And they, again, they themselves would say they made the right decision in terms of getting down safely. I mean, the reaction, we were all strung out. People were in various camps along the mountain. So John Murray, the filmmaker, was actually at the North Col. And he had stayed there deliberately for days and days and days to try and film me coming back down, and Frank and me coming back down. So we sort of met him at the North Col, picked him up, and then we and on down late in the evening. Now again, it got dark on us, so that we were going down to, I was very keen to get right down to advanced base camp, given the way the weather was deteriorating. And that was in really deep snow. I mean, that was sort of waist deep snow going down through that. But we had that section fitted with fixed ropes, which kept it safe. And again, it was the edge of darkness when we got down to advanced base camp, and there was a big crowd of the team there. So that was sort of the first time you could relax, really, because you were actually off the mountain. But that was another long day. You know, we'd been on the go for at least 12 hours that day as well, you know, and suddenly that's the even more turning period, because again, you've lost that sort of adrenaline urge of, you know, being up high and you're just getting down. So we were completely exhausted and getting down. We still then had, you know, the miles down to base camp to go down there as well, and deep snow, and now because the weather had broken, and the whole of the next day was spent getting down to our base camp. And so the celebration really only happened when he got right back down to base camp, and that was a great celebration. I mean, it was all our Nepalese kitchen staff and our support team, doctor and base camp managers and everybody, the whole expedition got reunited and back down there. And even the Tibetan yak herders had come in to lift all our gear back up. They joined the party, and it was a great party, and lots of singing, lots of dancing, lots of celebrations, because we were off the mountain and everybody was safe, really, and we'd been successful. So everything had gone right, really. I mean, obviously, it would have been even better if, you know, 3, 4, 6 people, all 8 of us had got to the top. But the fact that I got there and represented the team, and crucially everybody was safe, that was what everybody was celebrating. You know? And we were relying on a satellite phone. In those days, satellite phones were about the size of a suitcase and had a big dish area on the top. And a satellite only went over twice a day for a few hours that we were within range. So although Lorna and Dermot have been broadcasting about the success of the expedition from not in real time, because they wanted to wait until I was down off the sun and safe, but certainly the day we were coming down from advanced base camp, they were doing broadcasts about it. So it was the next day before I was able to talk to home, talk to Margaret, talk to the friends, and do broadcasts, really. And so there was a sort of a delay there in terms of being able to reunite with people. But because we pushed it so late and timing-wise, we were under the pressure because the weather had broken. There was a risk that the high pass back over from Tibet to Nepal would get closed again. So we actually packed up and got out pretty quickly after that. I think it was in the next day or on the day after that. This sort of mad packing. So we didn't actually have much time to relax at the end until we got back to Kathmandu. And then that's when we were able to finally sort of relax and have a proper party. And quite a lot of our wives and partners had come out to Kathmandu to meet us there. Had a very pleasant few days before we travelled home.
An amazing story, and so well told by Dawson. I asked him what he thought of it all, looking back over the remove of 30 years.
Well, I mean, obviously it was an enormously rewarding trip in so many ways. And I think looking back over the period of time, I think I'm very grateful that we were there at that time. We were there before the mountain got crowded, before it got commercialised, when we had the mountain to ourselves. It was saying on the upper part, and that we were able to climb the way that we climbed all the other mountains, really. And that opportunity on Everest now is gone for most mountaineers. Everest, in particular in the south side, but even on the north side, not in recent years because the Chinese have closed it. But on the south side in particular, it has become so managed, controlled, organised for so many big numbers that it's impossible for people to have the experience that we had, because we were there, as was said, on our own, making our own decisions, without huge crowds of people around us. And I regret that. Obviously times have gone on, and it's great that so many people have an opportunity to climb big mountains, but it does change the experience for people, and certainly the experience that we had is not repeatable, really, for most people now. not to say you can't have that experience in other mountains. Obviously, the Himalayas are vast. There's hundreds, dozens, hundreds of mountains. There's still plenty of small expeditions going out and doing pioneering routes, doing new routes, first ascents, difficult routes. But Everest itself has changed. There's no doubt about that, and that's I would regret that because we had such a good experience. Really, it feels sad to me that other people who've be a similar mindset to us can't have that experience. You either you go as part of an organised team, and that's really the only opportunities really to go there.
What a fabulous conversation with Dawson. But a man of that experience and achievements, it would be remiss of me not to ask him, has he any advice for young climbers and mountaineers?
Yeah, I would have lots of advice. I mean, I've spent, 20, 30 years or so trying to encourage young mountaineers. We've been involved in many trips for young mountaineers out to picker peaks and deliberately trying to take on the experience that I had when I was young and going out. And I think my advice generally is that, the rewards come from investment in the commitment and the time. And if you want to do it, there's still, Everest has changed, but there's still so many opportunities for going out to big peaks. I was in Greenland in 2004, I think it was, and there's a small group of us, 6 or 7 of us, and we were able to go there relatively cheaply into an area where the vast majority of the peaks had never been climbed. And we climbed, I think between us we climbed 15 mountains that nobody had ever climbed before. Not very high altitude, most of them not very difficult, but just going into a remote area where you're completely on your own, you're completely self-reliant, and you can climb things, you go places where nobody's ever been. And those opportunities are still there in the world, in places like Greenland, Himalayas. It is still possible to go and have, proper adventures and test yourself against the mountains at, different levels of technical difficulty. You don't need to be an extreme technical climber to go and do that. You can go and do exploratory mountaineering at a modest technical grade. So there's so many opportunities out there. And the advice I think would be build your experience up, build up that knowledge, and sort of gain the rewards from being self-reliant in the mountains.
I so enjoyed my trip up to Belfast to meet Dawson in his office, and I want to thank him again for his hospitality and how amazingly generous he was with his time. If you want to read more about this expedition, I highly recommend Lorna Siggin's book, Everest Calling. Lorna had a front seat view of all the drama of the expedition, being the Irish Times reporter who covered it firsthand. So the first Irish Everest expedition had been a success. But the story of Ireland and Everest does not end there. Many people, inspired by the success of Dawson and driven by their own reasons, dreams and ambitions, would take on the challenge of Everest. Join us next week when we begin our conversation with a mountaineer from the other end of the island from Dawson, a man from Cork City, Pat Falvey.